to kick things off and settle into this evening, I'm going to pass over to Charissa to take us through a karakia.
Cool. Ngā mihi nui, Dave. Te taua mai runga, te taua mai raro, te taua mai e roto, te taua mai e waho. Kia tau ai te mauri tū, kia tau ai te mauri ora, tūturu whakamawa, kia tina, tina. Homie, hui, taiki.
Thank you very much, Charissa. And again, great to see people punching all that information into the chat box. I can see Grant and Charissa will have their work cut out for them to get through all of that in the short term. Look, before we get started, a little bit of background on our host. So Charissa, can you tell us about your current work and perhaps some of your coaching experience and some of the insights you'll share with us this evening?
Yeah, where do you start? 32 years ago, I came into coaching with my dad. We were then allowed to put people on the back of the truck and go to Hastings and Akina Park. Now, kia ora koutou, everyone. I live in Hawke's Bay, Te Matawa, Maui. Yes, we have been through the cyclone recently on a farm here, but my coaching day started in Havelock North and Hastings, and we'd have the whole softball team and we'd head off to the softball park in Hastings, and that's when my coaching started at 15 years to currently. I'm a physical education and health teacher by trade, and could really see the value of support to engaging with young people within the classroom, engaging with them out of the classroom, and I've spent some time at Netball New Zealand. I can see Denise there on the chat there. Hi, Denise. I know you do an amazing job down there in Selwyn, and currently at Sport New Zealand as a regional sport consultant. So look forward to talking coaching tonight and meet some different coaches on the chat there. We've got a whole range here, Dave, I think.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Charissa. I know in preparation for this event, it's been so good to get to know you and some of your experiences and I guess have some philosophical alignment around this. It's going to be a good discussion. Grant, over to you. Where are you beaming in from? And tell us a little bit about your coaching background.
Hey, thanks, Dave. I'm actually beaming in from Karapiro at the Māori Cup. This pleasant fine evening. I'm awesome. But normally based out of Wanaka down in the deep south, so I'm a wee way from home. But as the photo shows, I'm a dad who's coached a bit. I'm not quite sure we got the expert title in the promo, but I'll do my best. I'll do my very best. But I started coaching about 15 years ago. I started football, ripper rugby, tennis, cricket, hockey, all ages, boys, girls, rep, club, school. But it was about a couple of years ago, I went on a bit of a journey to understand coaching, coaching styles, coaching philosophies, and in particular, coaching teenagers in sport. And it kind of redefined a little bit about how I see, how I coach and why I coach, but also how I define success and results in kids' sport, really. So, yeah, that's my background, and I'll do my best to uphold that expert tag for you.
Well, I think you're an expert if you're choosing to live in beautiful parts of New Zealand like Wanaka. That's a smart decision. So welcome, Grant, and great to have you with us. As I said at the start, my name's Dave Wright. My background is football. I'm the co-founder of Player Development Project, so very excited to be working in collaboration with Sport New Zealand on the Balance is Better platform and presenting these webinars. We've been doing that for a few years. I've been very lucky to be coaching for over 20 years now, and I've coached in New Zealand, Australia, and England. Had a very awesome experience coaching in professional clubs in the UK, which taught me a lot about coaching and developing athletes. Subsequently went to Melbourne Victory and then returned to New Zealand after 12 years abroad to work with High Performance Sport New Zealand in a HP athlete development consultant role, which was, again, great learning across the system and different sports, and now work as head of coaching at Birkenhead United and on Player Development Project as well. So plenty of hats and plenty of experiences to share, but most importantly, want to get some insights out of you guys tonight. So we'll push on. A little bit of housekeeping before we get into the presentation, and thank you again to all of you who are putting messages into the chat box. It's great to see so many different countries represented, so really excited about that. So do utilize that chat box. We will do everything we can to get to your questions as we go. If we see questions that chime in or align, I guess, with the ideas that we're presenting, we'll get to them. So don't be shy in asking questions as we go, and we'll do our best to get to all of them. In the background, we have Hamish Rogers sitting there adminning this call from Sport New Zealand. Hamish is there for tech support. If you've got any questions, if you have any issues, please feel free to punch a message into the chat box and he can support. If for any reason the software kicks you out of the room, you can log back in on the link that you've come in on. Also, last point, look out for more Balance is Better webinar events coming up in 2023. I know there's plenty on the agenda there. So with that said, we've divided the conversation this evening into 4 key areas. The first being connections and culture. The second, redefining success. The third is training design and the impact of game day or performance on that practice. And of course, a piece around coach and parent and that sort of importance around game day behavior. So we're going to sort of work through some key ideas. We're going to have some discussions, see where it goes. And again, if you've got questions as we go. So connections and culture is our start point. We're at the start of a winter season in New Zealand for a lot of codes that are kicking off right now, either finishing preseason and getting into competitions, or if they're not already, they're getting started pretty shortly. So, Theresa, I want to throw to you first. When it comes to setting the culture at the start of the season and potentially giving the players some ownership of this process, what are some ideas around building culture, which eventually are hopefully going to manifest when it comes game time?
Yeah, I suppose, Dave, let's start with the coach that was 15 years old and even into her 30s. Coaching, the coach that would have started with what's wrong with the players. You know, you go to trials, you've got the skills, you see, oh, I need to do this, this, and this to achieve this. So that coach in me has shifted over time. And I suppose some of the light bulb moments for me were around, well, actually, what does success look like first before you even get into planning or doing anything? And for me, success, if your players want to come to trainings and find joy in the trainings and the games, and trainings and games blend in, that's where I've shifted to over time. You know, the old coaching philosophy, I think when I applied for New Zealand secondary schools, better people, better players. But, you know, Grant, I think you said expert. I was definitely not an expert when I put that philosophy together. Finally, I know now what I know then. So when you start about, one of my biggest light bulb moments is understanding the players at all the phases of the season. And you can establish culture at the start, but culture's developed over time. So more importantly, how do you understand your players at the start of the season? What are their motivations? Why do they want to be there? Often I see, and I have 3 teenagers. I have one down at first year Canterbury University, one down at Volleyball Nationals at the moment. I have to put a shout out, amazing event, 168 people. And so much joy and cheering, and a 14-year-old as well. But how do you know your players? And one thing I tried last year, I think it was a Wade Gilbert, might have been a workshop when I was a PCA coach that I was on. It was a Dear Coach letter. Dear Coach, you know, and I gave them 3 questions. Well, what do you want from me this season? Why do you want to be in this team? What's important to you? You know, we kind of fleshed out, you know, how can I help you? And it really flipped the way that I started planning the season. Yep, I had all the key dates. You know, that the coach that in her mid-20s would have gone, here's the dates, we're going to do attack here, centre pass attack. And netball, for most of you out there, is my main sport that I've coached, and I've coached multiple, like Grant as a parent as well and as a PE teacher. But that's really moved for me, and that formed our season last year. And it's just so heartwarming to remember why you're in coaching when you read those letters. Well, what do I need to craft skillfully and purposely across the season to bring to help them over the season, keep them connected, help them find joy in every training and every game. And let's be honest, I'm not an expert of getting it right every time, but we've got to give it a go at some stage. So for me, that's culture. It starts with getting to know your players first. And then from there, then you can go on that journey of building culture. And culture's growing over time. It's not something you do, team building, fun activities in your first 2 trainings and then go park that, done. We're on to skill development now.
Yeah. No, I think, do you know what's really interesting there for me, Theresa, is the words you've used around joy, connection. You talked about the coach letter, or Dear Coach letter, and that it really is an ownership piece, right? Like giving them some control over the environment. What do they want from you? So some keywords which certainly don't involve X's and O's, so to speak, in the technical tactical. Grant, for you, when you sort of think back on your own coaching journey, have you tried different things when it comes to establishing this culture? Because for me, when you walk into any team at the start of the season, a culture already exists, right? But then as a coach, maybe you've got an opportunity to shift that in a different direction, or perhaps you've got context on the culture from the previous season if you've been there as a coach. So what are your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, it's really interesting. Sometimes it depends on ages and you know what sort of team you're taking over. They might all be new players. They might have played a lot before, but I'm really keen on the culture of connection. So so making sure that you, like, I really like what Theresa was saying there around knowing your player, right? And it is about trying to make sure that pre-match, post-match training, it is all about connection for me, and making sure that we're all on the same page. We're all sailing in the same direction, really, because a lot of it is being athlete-centered, not self-centered. What do they want to do? What do they want to achieve this year? And you've got to really start the season understanding what they want out of the season. Are they a development type team that just want to, score a few goals? Are they a competitive team that want to, go to different places and go to tournaments, those sorts of things? So understanding that and their why, and I think that can really help with the parental thing that we're going to talk about later as well, is get some really clear goals. The team building, all those things, they're really, really cool things to do. But I think also to grip that up, you need to understand where this team wants to go, and it's not about us as coaches. It's about them. Athlete centered.
So let's play devil's advocate there, just to throw grenades in the mix early. And coaching, I think, has a historical, or let's say a tradition, where the coach is perceived to be in control, right? And this concept of control for me is one of these really fascinating kind of areas that perhaps hasn't been explored enough in coaching as a concept. So the idea that the coach is the fountain of knowledge, the idea that the coach leads or sets a culture. There might be some out there that go, well, actually, as a coach, that's my job. Like, I need to be there to teach and to do these things. So are there risks around going too far towards athlete ownership? And where's that balance in terms of coach perhaps setting expectations and athletes having ownership of the environment? So happy for either of you to chime in, because I want to just test you, I guess, on the spot early doors.
Oh, I love a grenade. So I think if we think about coaching and we think about the innate, we play sport, there's a winner and a loser. There's competition at stake, and in the school teams, and I can see there's a few representative coaches there. Organisations might hang their hat on, winning that national title or winning the regional title. My husband helped out with Napier Boys First 15 last year, and I was at Napier Girls, and both our teams went reasonably well. But there was a fine line between ownership from the players and them owning and having a voice versus them just wanting to sometimes come to training, shut out their stresses of the day, and they call me Reese, sorry, same person for the audience out there, and just wanting you to give them a bit more direction. So you've got to be really skillfully craft as a coach at the start of the week, what training sessions where you maybe give a little bit more direction, give a little bit of clarity of what they're needing so that they can get the confidence when they go out there and play the game. At the end of the day, they want to play the game, but most of them just want to play. Yeah. So how can we help them do that in a way that has an amazing experience, that they get confidence, that they develop the skills? And it's a real art to what to do when. I think, Grant, you kind of talked to know your players. That's where you've got to be present as a coach. Every training, every game, you've got to come into training, dump what you've done the day, and well, the first time I met you in that beautiful farm down south and that beautiful background, we've got to dump our working days and come into the coaching environment, and that is not always easy to do.
Yeah, no, I agree. It is a privilege to coach, right? So it is a priority on the day to make sure you're going to look after these kids. I also think it's really key that sometimes you have to lead them to where you want to take them as well, because some kids naturally they kind of might know where they want to go, but it's not necessarily a direction that's a good one. So you're right, there is a skill in being able to lead them and hope that you can grow them by way of just letting them sort of make some mistakes, go down a wrong path, bring them back onto task and bring them online. And that's where if you set those goals at the start of the season and they're something that you keep living, it might be every game. You just look at one of those values that you're trying to outlive. It could be just respect for this week. We're looking at respect, and that's just keep living those goals. And also, it's really interesting that if culture's always changing, right? So you might change halfway through the season and say, actually, let's reset some of these things. That's okay as well. You don't have to just keep going down that same path if it's not working.
Yeah, I love that one, Grant, around change. And I think we've got the point on screen around modeling, right? So as coaches, we're going to have bad sessions. As coaches, we're going to get things wrong. And if we can model the behavior of going, actually, team, I've planned something today and it hasn't really gone well. I've tested saying it didn't work, but thanks for putting in the effort. We're going to tweak it next time and it'll be better. Then suddenly we're modeling that behavior of vulnerability and being able to change on the run. So for me, currently working with some players at the moment, I found that often when we get into a Q&A context, it's a very one-way street. And I've reiterated to them that I'm not going to tell them how to play the game. I'm going to encourage them to make decisions and learn through playing and put themselves in challenging positions where they are stressed or they're challenged. And I think it's really important that we encourage the dialogue, because Q&A is such an awkward one, particularly with teenage boys, right? A lot of them just don't want to speak up, or they don't want to say the wrong thing to the coach or in front of their mates. So have you got any stories, Charissa, I'll go back to you, around either where you've been in a position to model those kind of vulnerabilities, and just to tie into the point really around setting standards, what role do you think the coach has there as we build towards game day?
Yeah, I think as you build towards game day, or game day is probably another conversation at the moment, but kind of what, as coaches, how we are at trainings and how we are at games should be one and the same.
Yeah.
And finding that level playing field. And I'll hand on heart say that I have not always done that in coaching. Game day, I keep talking back to this old me of coaching back in the day, where you shift and you think you've got this little bubble in game day, but actually game day is just an extension of training.
Yeah.
I had a situation 3 or 4 years ago. Went back to the girls coaching again, and they were so quiet. I asked them all these questions. We're doing a debrief. I thought I had it all sorted out. We'd established our values, and they were silent. I could get not one word out of them. And I went away from that training, drove home. It takes about 40 minutes to get home from training, and thought, I haven't nailed this. What have I done wrong? I am not connected to these players. I've got to go back and start again. So the start of the next training, I just had to say, look, that's my fault. I buggered that up. Like if I can't have a conversation back and forth, and it's not live, and we're always learning, and like you talk about the campfire conversations, we're around the campfire talking all the time. Then as a coach, it's me. I need to change tact. What do I need to do? So I sent them a Google form. They were so silent, they weren't going to tell me. And I really want you to be honest, so we can grow and learn together. I'll never forget the awkward. A couple of parents sitting upstairs waiting to pick up their kids from training, and actually my daughter was in the team as well. It was her first year with her mother as a coach at senior A level, and never felt so uncomfortable in my life. And really important to say that, hey, look, I'm getting to know you as a group. I can't expect that I've had this many years of coaching that I can come in and I know better than the athletes in front of me. No matter how long you've been coaching, you're always learning. You're learning with that group in front of you.
Yeah, love it. Grant, anything to add on there, or any experiences to share around that modelling piece?
Probably way too many to break down, but I like the idea of that, expectations rather than rules, and owning your mistakes as a coach is a really key one. I made an absolute I had a shambles last year where I was so keen to have this boy back in the team. He'd been away for about 4 years. We had 4 weeks, COVID, all sorts of reasons. And it's that whole thing, see your players, so you if you see them and they're going to naturally play better for you. He was in the changing room. I missed him. I went through the team sheet, and then I was like, he's here. And so, but I immediately went up and said, hey, look, sorry, mate. I was so keen to have you in the team. And then it was a natural thing. You haven't been here all season. So, and he was cool with it. It was okay. We made up, and I said, look, you're on enough 5 minutes anyway. And he had a blinder. But, that's just owning your mistakes as a coach. You just got to do it and front up, and we're human as well.
100%. I remember sitting with a group of players in Melbourne a few years ago, and we did a session at the start of the year where it was similar to what Charissa talked about earlier. What do you want from us? And one of the questions we asked was, what is the number one thing that you value from a coach? And almost all of them said honesty. That was the overwhelming thread. So I think there's a huge amount there. If you can look them in the eye and be direct about, this is why perhaps you haven't been selected to start this week, or this is where you're at. They do value that. I think there's a caveat there that sometimes in more performance context, let's say, or context where athletes are transitioning towards performance, Sometimes they may not be ready for honesty, but if you've got that trust and you know those players, then you can certainly build on it. So some great insights and advice there, guys.
So and I think context is a good thing. You've got to know, have you got that team for a whole season versus when I had New Zealand secondary schools, 2 trainings and then booked into play in England and Australia. So whereas a senior A team, I have a very long season. It's very long at times. But yeah, you really got to be purposeful around that time that you do have with them. It's something you might just have for a week-long tournament, and that's it.
Absolutely. Yeah, contact time is obviously an issue for all coaches. We all want as much as we can from these children in sport, but we've got to be wary. So moving on, and Grant, you touched on this idea, and I guess in your bio earlier, a little bit about your background and learning over time around redefining success. I'm totally on board with this, and I've got to be in my bonnet when it comes to youth sport and I guess results-driven outcomes that we often see and the dangers of those. So let's talk a little bit about how games can link into the overall objectives for the season. We've talked about framing up the season. We've talked about giving the players some control and being really honest with them, asking them what they want. But for you, Grant, what do you see in terms of the types of outcomes beyond the result that game day can be utilized for? Because this is a huge piece across all areas of development.
Yeah, for me, it's huge that both teams are going out there to try and win, right? And the kids are trying to win. They're doing their best, but it's not a guarantee. It's not a given that you're going to win. You might have a draw. That's cool as well. But essentially, I look at the game day as a reward for a really good week's work at practice, and it's also a subset of the season as well. So it's not something to get carried away with if it doesn't go quite that well. There's always next week, and there's always a tournament. Those sorts of things. So. For me, I try to break it down to 2 or 3 things within the game that we're trying to achieve. Just keeping it simple. It might be one of them's a value that we're trying to uphold. One of them's a soft skill like communication. So if the result doesn't go the right way on the scoreboard for the kids that are really, really keen on that, we've always got a couple of things that we can say, look, this went really well. And then there's always a thing, even if something, the scoreboard says who the winner is at the end of the day, I've always got a couple of things that we can work on and be better. And that's in our debrief and our reflection. So I really like to think that there's 2 or 3 things that you can come out of a game with and say, we had a really good result tonight, guys, and leave on a positive.
Absolutely. Trista, what about you?
Last season would have to be where you had to redefine success. I know we had COVID a few years ago, but we got locked down and then we came back into some form of season. But last year we were heavily impacted by COVID coming and impacting the health of our team. And then the flu season kicked in. So in redefining success out of that, in some ways you're absolutely pushed into redefining success in a positive way. So I've been grappling with what success looks like when, that again, I go back to that old Reese coach, the winning, getting to nationals and winning nationals. So we decided as a team we had these epic values, and it wasn't spelled as epic, it stood for being an expert learner, process, stay in the process, control the empathy and control the controllable. So our debrief systems came from that value set. Well, what went well and why? What were we epic about? Why? And why were we epic every week? And what next? So we kind of had the 4 whys. It was us, and we ran that system all year. And probably the gold nugget moment for me, we qualified for nationals. And there was one player who didn't quite get on the court in her Google form debrief. She found that challenging, but she was really positive. And I went into nationals. Well, what do you want to get out of nationals? What's the one thing? None of them mention the win.
No.
The game. They all mention that they want to finish the season with fun. It's been a tough few years. We've made nationals. We're proud of that. So what are we going to be epic about? And so everyone did get on the court at nationals. Yeah. And again, the old Reese, I have to say, a few years ago, would never have done that. So I can hand on heart say that everyone got at least we promised 4 quarters to them, and they were happy with that. So to me, that's redefining success. And if this one player was listening, this player's still playing next year, the one that we didn't get this year. Now, actually, we're in this year already. Forgot the Cyclones. So she's still playing and signed up and asked how to sign up at university. So that's their success there, is when they transfer out of your environment and still have a love for the game. I'm not going to remember that the national title. They're not going to remember, but they'll remember how you made them feel.
Yeah. I love the fact that you sort of co-created the outcomes there. Like you said, look, you've had some experiences as, let's say, a less experienced coach, and then you've learned those lessons and applied them by really co-creating what they want to get out of that tournament. The idea of individual learning objectives, again, this is something that I had a lot of experience with abroad, where the best possible environments I've been in did everything they could in a team context. And it's important to reiterate the team lens here, and my lens being football, of developing individuals within the group, as opposed to focusing on we've won a game, therefore we're a good team. And this is saying that after 10 years or so of coaching, it wasn't something that shifted in me until I got to the UK. So I've got a real passion around this individual development piece, integrating individual learning plans or learning objectives for young players as part of redefining success, and again, co-creating those kind of plans with them. What do they like? What would they like to work on, and what do they think they're best at? So have you guys got experience around implementing this stuff in hockey or netball? Grant, I'll go to you first around how you can really ensure that individuals are being tailored for and being stretched and challenged based on where they're at in their development in your context.
Yeah, for me, it's those little individual conversations. We're really lucky in hockey that we get to roll subs quite frequently. So, and for me, it's actually letting them make the mistakes, but we can deal with that really live on the day. So I don't like to take them off when they made a mistake, but we're rolling subs quite frequently, and we have a pretty good policy around when you roll, and it's something you can fix by a little whisper in the ear and say, what do you think about that, and question them and help them during the game. That's a really, really key one with me, is those individual conversations, and helping them by they can go back on in 5 minutes and try and rectify something that hasn't been quite going right in the last 10 minutes. So those little individual conversations with players are really, really key, and helping them to understand where they might need to be on the field, where they might need to be looking. I'm not so big on instructional from the sidelines type behaviour. I'm always really, really interested, and I'd be keen to hear your thoughts on this, Dave, as to when you watch the English Premier League, right? You see those managers and their performances on the sideline and their little sort of, I call it the idiot box where they get into, right? Does that work? I mean, it's such a big field, and the gesticulating and instructional stuff that happens from the sideline. Basketball the same, but might be a smaller, more intimate environment. But does that actually work?
Look, I think this goes back to the concept of control. And I think this perception that we as the coach can influence it. I have no doubt that in a critical moment, the coach getting a piece of information to a player that's potentially passed on to the group or to the group can make an impact. I don't think we can ever underestimate the role of the coach to see things differently from their perspective. But I agree with you that teams, particularly when we're talking about youth sport, we're not talking about winning a Premier League or FA Cup. We're talking about developing people through sport and ensuring they stay in the game. Then we've got to look at it and go, well, they've got to have their experience, and our behavior could be mimicked by our players. So if we're behaving poorly, it's likely they might do the same, for example. So yeah, I think it's a challenge, because with the access we have to sport across codes on TV through all sorts of mediums these days, it's very easy for inexperienced coaches to mimic the behavior that they see in a performance context. And we're talking about the elite level, the 0.1% of the 1%, and that's not what community and youth sport's about. It's a very different beast. So I think we've got to be mindful there around that behavior piece. So it's a really good pickup, Grant. Sure, is there anything from your perspective on that, or the individual stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose I've been involved at a national and a regional level where I've seen player profiles, one-on-one systems, at camps, and I do question the purpose of them and why we do that. Is that because we've rolled them out before, and do they understand the language? Is it a summative report versus an ongoing conversation? So I think when time is precious for our teenagers, they are pulled in absolutely multiple directions. So they've got NCEA, they've offered leadership opportunities at school. We're asking them to be on top of everything all of the time, and then come into our sport environment, which might be this much of their life, and suddenly, and it's supposed to impact their well-being positively, and suddenly it becomes another stressor. So how do we help them manage all of that through a snapshot? If you've got to really learn to be a speed data. If you've only got 5 minutes for a one-on-one or a catch up with that athlete, what would be the 1 or 2 questions that you could have, and have those up your sleeve all the time? I'm not sure on player profiles, because I have to understand, especially in youth sport, do they mean, if we ask our players, what do they mean to them? Does it? We're coaching at the end of the day is the art of behaviour change, isn't it? So we're trying to shift behaviour, whether it be physically, socially, emotionally as well, and to get them to all come together. But a player profile that provides a summative report of where they are and that snapshot in time doesn't go back to the process and the ongoing learning journey. So skillfully craft throughout your season those little one-on-one catch-ups. As I think, Grant, going back to your athlete centre, that puts athletes at the heart of it. Then you can check in, then you can pivot as you need to throughout the season, and be okay to pivot just by having those conversations with individual players, because then that comes into your collective plan, doesn't it, and how you do the trainings.
No doubt. I think as adults, we're often guilty of overcomplicating the environment. So again, whether that's replicating the performance narrative, I've seen individual learning plans which have 35 different criteria which are evaluated by numbers, and I just think that is horrific. Like, it's an Excel spreadsheet. That turns me off as an adult. How's a teenager going to engage with evaluating every competency across a sport that they might require? For me, a good individual learning plan might have 1, 2, 4 things across the 4 corners, which is a model, I guess, in coaching around psychological, social, technical, tactical, and physical. And they might have one thing they think they're really good at, and then they might just think about one of those things during training or at the game, and that might just be a constant dialogue. As you've both alluded to, the power of those conversations linking back to the plan. For me, it should just be a simple one-pager that they're driving and we're supporting. So
I think you nailed it there. They're driving it. With autonomy, we know about self-determination. There's frameworks and miles that sit behind this, but where's the autonomy for the players to own their journey? And our coaching systems can help create that autonomy.
Absolutely. And we've got to then bring that to life on game day. We've got this point here around transfer of learning. If I've got a player who's an unbelievable dribbler on the ball, which I know, having done a little bit of work with Hockey New Zealand in the past, is a similar attribute, Grant, that hockey coaches desire to see players that can really dribble and run with the ball and rip the game up 1v1. If you've got that player, then let them do it on game day. Encourage them to do it. That could be their objective. So what's your guys' take in terms of either transfer of learning from training from a team perspective, or those ideas around individuals? Grant, I'll go to you first.
Yeah, I think it's simulating the game during training. So, I'm really key on opposed training, right? So cones don't move, but players do. So let's match them up, and let's get that good player who's really good at dribbling. And if he's 1v1 just nailing it, let's put 1v2. And you see it all. There's a lot of stuff that happens in the professional game, right? But you can actually look at that and say, if these kids want to go to a place that maybe we need to simulate some of the stuff that happens there as well on them. And I look at hockey, and so the modern game is we've often taught 2v1, 3v2, that sort of stuff, and now it's 1v2. How do you get out of those sorts of situations? So challenge them and take them out of their comfort zone, and it might not necessarily happen in the game, but when it does, it's not foreign to them. They can cope, and we're all about trying to help them cope under pressure during a game, and it's really hard to simulate some stuff during training, but the more you can throw. I like to throw lots of different stuff in a training and see how they cope, and so that come game day, they'll make heaps of mistakes. That's cool. Let's just take that and then we'll work on it next week.
Yeah, I love the idea of stretching that player that's got the attributes or flying at the moment. And similarly, you can scaffold that challenge differently to people that aren't potentially getting success or maybe need their confidence boost. I think about that from a practice design perspective around getting success. How do we make it a little bit easier for the player that's struggling? Charissa, what about you when it comes to learning transfer leading into games?
You transfer of learning from training, that's a magic question. Most
It is.
coaches want to do it. I know when I first started coach education courses years ago, I used to start with, closed environment, learn the skill, and then add more pressure on as you go. We've probably flipped that model. I think Grant spoke to using constraints, playing with constraints, TGFU.
Yep.
Came around actually when I was at phys ed school with Dennis Slade back then. So he was a master of teaching games understanding, and really kind of opened my eyes to how you can craft trainings in a way. Well, one, the players can find some joy and play. When they come to training, they just want to play more. But you can also be really skillful to manipulate the time, the space, the equipment to your game plan. Let's say in netball, we want to play a short possession game. We want to hold on to the ball on attack for a little bit longer, be a bit more patient. I can set them up in lots of mini games and with some questions. Well, how do we go on that? Or, well, when we went long, what happened? Why should we go short? And then bring in that decision-making element. Well, when should we go short? When should we go long? Or when should we do a mixture of the both? So the objective would be by the end of the season, they'll be able to make that decision on court and adapt to the opposition as needed. So that, Grant, your key dribble. So I don't know much about hockey. My mana plays hockey. I do know that. I'm a parent on hockey. The dribbler, let's say you came across a team and they shut that good dribbler down, so the rest of the team would then have the skills. So that's how we'd play it in netball. Like if I had a dominant position who received centre pass, a wing attack received 90% of the centre pass, and suddenly there was a good wing D in the defence that shut them down, well, then the team would have other ways that they could adapt on the spot and not wait for the quarter break for the coach to tell them to, I think you need to do this, this, and this. So if that's crafted at trainings, that carries on into the games throughout the quarters. So you're not waiting for the quarter breaks to shift their thinking.
Yeah, absolutely love it. Absolutely love it. I think just and as a coach, messing about with those things, experimenting with those things and different outcomes. The last point we've got here, and Grant, I want to come back to you on this: regular season versus tournaments. Tournaments are a big part of youth sport in New Zealand. There's a huge amount of tradition in the system, whether it's school or club, and they're important to the kids. So whilst we might step back and say, hey, winning's not everything, a lot of those kids want to go and win tournaments. I think Charissa touched on it earlier. So have you sort of had strategies or experiences in how you manage the different scenarios, Grant? I know you referred to it earlier on in the discussion, but what's your take on this one?
Yeah, tournaments, it's kind of like a second chance as well, if you think about it. And it is another set of goals. It is another. It's kind of it's also a reward too, and it sometimes gets a little bit serious as well. But I find them a really good way to take a team away and get away and do some other stuff as well. Because sometimes in tournament week you've got a little bit of downtime, so it can be a really fun way of connecting. And usually they come near the end of the season, so it's a great reward for a good season's work. And it's also, sometimes we might use the regular season to build towards a tournament as well. We did that last year, and it worked reasonably well. Because like last year we had some COVID issues, so the front end of the season was the reward was actually just getting a team together. So you almost had to say, look, let's focus on this tournament. But it's a really good way of actually condensing down into a week a whole bunch of games, a whole bunch of fun stuff, and having another set of outcomes, another set of goals, and finishing. The thing about that though is, there can sometimes only be one winner in a tournament, and you've got to have another couple of 2 or 3 things to take out of that tournament, and sometimes it's the off-field stuff. So, you might be building for next year as well.
Absolutely. And no doubt you're going to walk away with plenty of stories regardless. Now, before we move into the training design piece, I want to go to a question in the room from Lee. Charissa, I'm going to put you on the spot around this one. We've talked a lot about connection. We've talked about those one-to-one conversations and relationships. We've got a question from Lee. Having relationships strong enough that they can handle the truth. What are the signs that you've really got connection, and is honesty the best policy? So Charissa, I'll put you on the spot.
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. I had a situation earlier in my first game last year where in the Dear Coach letter, one of the players had said that she likes honesty and just wants me to give it to her straight on game day. And I did. I actually think I lost her for the whole season, to be honest. I have to be honest. I'm not sure if I got her back after that. honesty is only as good as what the situation is right in front of you. And I should have read how that girl turned up to that game. She was rushed in there, and honesty was not the right policy right then. So how do you know you got the relationship? I thought I had the relationship. Never assume you still have it. You always have to work at it. As soon as you assume you all have it, you'll make a mistake like what I did and lost it. And actually, it's really hard to get that back. I talk about like a trust balloon. You blow a balloon up, and that one moment, pop, I lost that trust. I cannot be honest with that player again. So I don't have an answer to it. I have a ongoing never assume that you've got the relationship.
Can I offer in that, sometimes it's about perspective as well. So, what our perspective of right and wrong is versus a teenager's and how they see the world is. So sometimes you have to let your view of things go a little bit and try and get down to their level and understand that they have a different perspective on things. So you can be really, really honest with them, but they're never going to, they might not get it. They might still think that we're, being too honest or whatever. But having that perspective from their eyes, same thing with parents, right? You just have to get that perspective right.
And they do change. I've got a 16-year-old daughter at the moment, 18-year-old teenager, and they change throughout the season. We can't assume that at the start of the season we've got it nailed, and they change from week to week, and that's okay. That's totally okay. That's all part of them learning who they are, part of their journey. We can't define who they are. They need to find that out themselves. So as a mum, I've experienced that in the last year, and as a mum, I've had to change. I think, Grant, as you said, so I've had to see it from their eyes, and it's me that needs to make the changes as a mum and actually become more invisible and give them autonomy. What I preach.
Yeah, well, look, I think you're both displaying self-awareness and empathy. And for me, they're two massive attributes in effective coaches. So some great thoughts on that question, Lee. Thank you. If you do have questions in the room, do chime in. Now, training design. So we've gone out, we've played, we're heading into the next week during the season. There's obviously a piece here around reflection. Now, a lot of programs, as Charissa touched on earlier, might work to a curriculum or weekly themes or topics, however you work in your sport. And there's a bit of a wrestle here for me in terms of coaches having some control over the environment and saying, hey, I've observed this on the weekend, we could work on that, versus working on a theme or moment of the game in different sports. So how would you go about the reflection process here for both players and coaches leading into that week? And have you got some thoughts around the curriculums or programs piece? Charissa, I'll go. Grant, I'll go to you first.
I'm really lucky. Maybe I get to drive 3 hours home from a game.
Nice.
And so it's quite a good time to debrief, just by myself, obviously. Yeah. And I think it's a really good thing for coaches to do, right? 3 hours might be a bit long, but by the time I get home, I'm over it. And my wife's a lot happier that I'm not talking to myself, so that's cool. But usually that reflection piece helps set up the next week, and so then we can go into training, right? And I always make sure that we have a 5-minute reflection on the game, what went well, what didn't, and so that we can learn from that. A lot around questioning, and I really like what you said, Charissa, around questioning, letting the players try and understand where we can be better, what didn't go so well, those sorts of things. So reflection after the game, we have a lot of, so the warm down's a really good time for reflection as well, just while it's really fresh in anyone's minds. Yeah. But then revisiting that, so it's not just okay, see you later, guys. But we are going to come back to that, and we're going to work on this. And curriculums, programs, I'm not so big on. I like to just create as we go sometimes, because it is sometimes the kids, you got to be a little bit fluid as well.
And Charissa, your thoughts on those two?
Yeah, so reflection for me is a big thing. I reflect honestly as a coach, and probably have kind of worked on those systems over the years. Unlike you, Dave, live on a farm and have the good drive home, which helps as well. What we did last year is kept our reflection systems the same for players and coaches. What went well and why, and what next. So training, so that training at the end of training and the warm down, what went well and why, and what next. And that's what we took into the game, and that would frame our team talk and and then we would play twice a week during the season and the longitudinal season. And then as coaches, well, what about us? What went well and why, and what next? And would debrief the similar at training, and then it's done. Game over. We move on. We've all got to go home to life. So it provides balance and perspective in sport that you're able to dump it at the end of the day. And the one thing I'm really, really big on, I know we'll get to parents soon, is I won't debrief the game with parents after the game. So I've got a bit of a 24-hour boundary, and it's around rituals. So rituals keep kids safe. If you think of early childhood, the rituals that they do around their days keep children safe. And so in sport, our rituals keep us safe, whether the game's gone well, training's gone well or not. We've still got this ritual. We still find something, that went well, and we look at, well, where to next? And we always ask why. So 24 hours, if they've got a question or something they weren't too happy about, to email me and copy the manager in. I haven't received one email yet. So that's success. So when you say redefining success, I'm not too sure. But the power of reflection's part of the journey. It's a part of your rituals, and it's a safety mechanism, I find, for young kids for confidence. That, okay, that's all right. I may not have got, that's okay. But there was that one thing that went well, and we celebrate the small wins. In terms of curriculums, Dave, I probably believe more in developing, looking at what's in front of you from a strengths-based perspective, and understanding these skill sets that need to be developed for each position, but understanding that, but not letting that be the heart of it. So at the end of the day, they do want to get better at the skills in the games, but if you go through that journey of connections, finding joy, maybe some constraints-based coaching, then they go, wow, shucks, I'm not turning fully, so I can't see down the court, so I can't see that left-hand side of the court. Oh, that's great. What do you think we can do? Shall we work on that for the next training? And so then that forms the next one. So it's pretty organic.
Yeah.
I think if you get too fixed, I'm a teacher by trade, to boxing the curriculum that this age and stage. Remember, we're dealing with youth sports, so they all grow socially, emotionally, physically, all at different rates. So we have to be really organic and flexible, but understand there are skill sets here, but how we go about implementing them, we need to be a little bit more agile around.
Yeah, look, I think the idea is, for me in youth sport, we're trying to develop kids to be the best version of themselves and maximize their own potential. And if they've got more ambition, let's support them to do that. And I know Melanie's just asked a question around the child driven by results, which is a nice segue. So I want to get to a question from Stefan before we head back to the topic. He's asked here, my high school team's the only team where I have rep players and players who are new to pick up a stick, as well as very different experiences. I also have a wide level of expectations. So what tips can you give to help maintain a positive culture to still achieve those expectations of players? So what I'm reading into this is managing difference, which is one of the biggest challenges for coaches at any level, whether it's grassroots or high performance. There is always going to be a difference in ability. So Grant, given it's a hockey question, I believe, I'll go to you. Have you got any tips from your experience around managing that difference around the top player versus those who are potentially different in terms of their training age or their experience?
It's a tricky one, but it's doable by way of thinking about it as a team game and taking those players and saying, we can't play as individuals because it's a team game. We need 11 players, might be 6. We need 11 players on the field. So it's actually about getting those players who might be a bit further ahead and getting them to help develop the players that might not be as where they are. And if they can all see that, we all need each other, because 2 or 3 players can't play defense, attack, and midfield all at the same time. We need everyone to have a role and to do that well. So we can use those better players through designing activities to help the other players. And it's also about saying, well, actually, if we want to go away to a tournament or something like that, we need players to be at a so let's all work together in this and use those better skilled players to bring the other ones up.
Yeah, love it.
Yeah, that's what I would do.
Yeah, peer-to-peer learning, it's a massive one. A friend and colleague of mine, Dr. Craig Harrison, who was on a webinar with us a couple of weeks ago, talks about the skate park learning environment, the importance of proximal development and kids pushing each other along. Sometimes as coaches, we can step back. So if we can create and set the environment, that learning you're talking about can happen, Grant. I want to go to Melanie's question, and Charissa, I'll probably throw this at you. I've certainly got views on this, how to work with the competitive child driven by results and wins, losses, who plays in the same team as the player who's just playing for enjoyment or recreation, how to keep them both engaged. The first thing I sort of think is we don't want to take the fire out of the competitive player. We want to endorse that and support that. But how do you manage those two extremes, Charissa?
Yeah, that's your sport, full stop.
Yeah.
Every first 15 rugby team, first 11 hockey team has a mixture of players who play for the sheer enjoyment of, and pride of playing with their friends and for their school, and every senior A team I've had, to the kid who really, is driven by talent ID, representative teams, and that further selections as well. So it's more than just thinking within your environment. You've got to think of the wider system as well for those competitive players. I think that's really, really, really important. That there's often, I think about coaching for character. What else are we coaching for? And if we're focused on, and I don't know when I said the word effort before, it was around process and control, the controllables. Now the players came up with that, and Melanie, to speak to your point, I had players who were nationally identified to players who had come from, I had a beautiful girl who had come from, never made the junior A team all the way through, came from the B2 team the year before to the senior A team last year, and ended up, I can talk about our leadership system another time or another question, ended up the captain by the end of the season, with the other three players who are nationally identified as well. Four. So getting them to connect and getting that empathy piece was another one of our values as well. So understanding empathy. I had a player in the team who had a different way of processing information, so had to learn quite differently. So I had to be really careful. So I didn't want to disenchant in the competitive ones and get their frustration. I understand that they're competitive. That's innate. That's what makes them determined. That's their superpower. So we're the theme of superhero. So that was your superpower. We want to bring that out. But how can we bring that out in a way which has empathy for your team? And we can really focus on our values and the process as well. It's probably the hardest bit is keeping the confidence of that player who's just playing for the enjoyment. And that's where you've got to be really careful around finding opportunities for court time. You've got to get them on the court. They've got to be playing the game. So really have to be skillfully craft when you do that and back them. You celebrate the small wins of this player here in terms of your values. So that's what we'd celebrate. So in that process, that shooter who put up 10 shots, her goal was to over half a game, because the last game she had only put on up 2. We celebrate that, and we celebrate our big wins. Awesome. So it's not easy, but if it was easy, we'd all be amazing coaches.
Absolutely. I think that's the beautiful thing. It goes back to purpose we talked about earlier. Grant mentioned the privilege of coaching, and I think it's grey, it's ambiguous, and it's never perfected. So a couple of final points there around representative design. We'll touch on that quickly. I think it's really critical that sessions look like the game, whether that's part of a program or whether that's a reaction to the performance on the weekend. But this concept of athlete welfare, the demands on the child, we did address it earlier. Any thoughts on the wrestle here around different sort of different playing commitments, between school, club, representative teams have been touched on in the chat box and by both of you. So how do we manage that balance between, the expectations we have in our team environment versus all the other stuff that they're doing? Charissa, I'll go back to you first on this one.
Oh, yeah, this is, I've lived and breathed this now through my kids and through coaching a national youth side as well. At the end of the day, let's build the campfire. Let's keep it really simple. Sometimes we can overcomplicate. We sometimes make assumptions of what's happening in other environments. Let's put the player at the heart of it. What do they want to get out of it? They don't want an individual development plan here, one over here for this coach and one over here for this coach. So how do we build the campfire? Who's their support network? And how do you bring the whānau into that conversation is really, really important. If we put the well-being, let's really talk well-being. Let's talk long-term, that we want them in the game long-term. We want them to have, what I talk about with the parents is mountains and valleys. So, back-to-back tournaments, especially basketball netball clash is quite common here. So we've got a couple players which do both. So you've had a mountain of 3 tournaments in a row. Well, let's create a valley for you. So in training today, you're only allowed I use perceived rate of exertion with them at the start of the season. So you're only allowed up to a 5. So it might be more that you're a post today. Well, actually, you need that training off, and that's okay. I hardly ever have a full team training over the season, but that's okay as well, because we kind of just keep the culture going throughout it all. So for her well-being, if she needs a valley, she needs a valley. And not even to come and watch training to try and be a part of it, because there's studies and everything else coming up. That's a whole nother webinar.
It is. Look, it's a massive rock, and I think we all agreed offline that is entirely massive, that subject. So something we've all got to be aware of. I want to push on to our final topic. Grant, I'm going to come to you first. This is critical. You referenced the idea of Premier League coach behaviour, which obviously resonated with me. I think it's an issue, and I'd like to say that, things are getting better, but I still see behaviour from adults around youth sport, which isn't at the level it should be. And I think we've got to be better across the whole system there at in whatever context that is. So getting alignment and ensuring that behaviour on game day is appropriate. So how do you go about communicating with parents around expectations, your messages to the players, and ensuring they're included in that and they understand what they're seeing on game day?
Yeah, it's a massive topic, but I'll do my best. But in the short time we've got, obviously communication's the key to it. But I also talked about perspective and trying to see it through their point, through the eyes of. And one thing, actually, I've been up here looking at rowing for a week, which is something slightly different for me. And what I've been thinking about as I sit on the sidelines here, and I love watching coaches and parents and players and interactions. And one thing that I've been sort of thinking about is that, the kids are out there trying their best, doing their best to win. They get the experience of playing the game as they might not win, the result doesn't go, but they've also got the satisfaction of having played, and they can come away from it and go, that's cool, I got to play. The parents are also wanting to win, right? They're there, they're on the sidelines. They've put a lot of emphasis and time and money to get there to watch and to try and win. And so when it doesn't quite go that same, they don't get the result that they wanted, they haven't had the experience of playing the game. So they're missing an element there. So I think, as much as we can communicate, we can try, and we do a lot of these things, we keep the parents engaged and close to try and give some parents some roles within the team, newsletters, those sorts of things. But perspective and actually understanding that, look, they put a lot of time and effort in, but they don't maybe necessarily get the same out of the game as what the kids do, so they can't move on. And so if you understand that, you can say, actually, no, look, you've done your best, and we all have parents that we naturally align to, because they're the ones that after the game they come and say thanks, and that's all great. And then we all have the other parents where we sort of shy away and go, here they come again. But that's not necessarily a bad thing if we just put it into perspective. That I always think that if you get your why across, what are we trying to achieve? Why are we doing this? Because a lot of the questions that the parents are going through is, why did you do that? Why did you pull so-and-so off? Why is my child not playing at the front? Why are we not scoring goals? All these whys, right? But if we can get it through and say, actually, we're just trying to actually develop a passing game and get through, because we're going to tournament now. There's a bigger picture here. Sometimes that, you can align yourself with parents who are saying, oh, okay, that's cool. We're get them on the same page through communication, understanding your why. I always have this little mantra that I think about, which is, come stand where I stand, see what I see, do what I do, and you might understand why. I'm really open to parents coming and standing beside me or in the dugout. It's not the done thing, but I don't have anything to hide, so I don't mind it. But
that's awesome. Yeah, I love that. I remember flagging that idea when we were having some parental problems in a professional club, and it went down like a lead balloon. And I thought, well, actually, if we want these parents to support us around the individual objectives of these players, then maybe they should let's bring them onto the grass for a session, show them what we're doing, let them hear the interventions, hear the communication with the players, as opposed to being over there behind the fence or breeding anxiety in the car park because they're all unsure as to what's going on. So, Charissa, I'll come back to you. around this idea of learning objectives. You know, Grant's talked there about the communication piece, but obviously there's got to be a relationship. And obviously we did a webinar on it a couple of weeks ago, and the replay is available on the Balance is Better website. If it's not up now, it will be up shortly, which is around coach, parent, and athlete. But for you, what's the importance of transparency and clarity from the get-go when it comes to getting the behavior right?
Oh, totally. Had seasons where you haven't been transparent and got through, and it comes back at the end of the day. If I was to theme why parents come to you, their kids haven't got on the court. And at the end of the day, it's around game time, and actually sport's expensive at the moment. And when they travel away, there's a bit of a moral compass here around the cost versus the return for them, which I totally understand. I know how much sport costs for me as a parent for 3 players. So I'm really big on, in an ideal world, COVID hasn't presented ideally, that there's a whānau engagement at the start of the season, and the players, you know, just like the dear coach letter, well, dear parents, what do we want from you? That's you know, we don't want to go home and have you debrief with me in the car, you know, yelling up from the stands. Well, what does it look like when you become epic parents? So they were our values. So when you're an epic parent, and as a parent myself, I've chosen, I'm not coaching my daughter this year, so I've chosen to become invisible. So my promise to her and the team was, we would never debrief the game for me to be an epic coach and then become an epic parent on the way home. Now, I might have slipped a couple of times because life's not let's be honest. Yeah. But, you've got to bring them on the journey, and you've got to check in. You've got to give them opportunities to ask questions and listen as needed. But then at the end of the day, we're putting the player first, their experience first, and the game finishes and it's over. And then we move on to the next thing. Good life skills.
Sound advice. I think the idea of not debriefing in the car is genuine wisdom, and I think if coaches can convey that to parents involved, it's absolutely key. So, really important to just get clear on what you expect from parents, and of course there'll be plenty of enthusiastic ones who want to do jobs and get involved as well. But I love Grant's idea of bringing them close to the environment, and that may not be all the time. I think there might be a limit there as to how much Grant might want to have those parents on his shoulder, but certainly getting them involved for transparency is key. And the last point, obviously, it's about the kids and it's their experience. So really that takes us to our summary slide. We've got a few key points here. We've talked about co-creation a lot tonight, and Charissa referenced a lot of player ownership, particularly earlier on in the conversation. Really important to understand what success looks like. What is the purpose of the group that you're working with? Is it a group of under-8s learning their sport and just trying to stay engaged, or is it a group transitioning towards performance? That context is key. Does your practice look like the game following game day? And of course, let the athletes own their story. There are 4 big ones, I guess, that we've distilled. But Grant, I want your final thoughts and anything that you sort of want to leave on this evening around the discussion. Any big rocks for you or any key themes you'd like to finish with?
Yeah, I think that whole key message around being athlete-centered versus self-centered as a coach, and, you know, let the athlete own their story. Where as a coach, we're a facilitator of a journey for them, growing them, helping them, you know, fulfill their goals, what they want out of sport. Because I think sport is a massive, it's a best part of my life, but it can be something that's really good for them socially, mentally, physically. It's a challenge. It helps them grow. And in a period of time where we've had COVID and all these things that go on, all the rubbish that's around the world, sport's a really great vehicle for us to all come together and have some fun and have a few wins and go home just feeling better about life. That's just my key thing.
Love it. And Charissa, for you, your final thoughts?
Yeah, and I have to talk about the cyclone for those overseas. I live on a farm, was reasonably isolated for about 3 weeks with floods just recently, and the power of sport to young people was the first thing at volleyball practice. I took Mana and Nika to my younger 2, and they came out with the first smile I'd seen in weeks. Yeah. So that really resonated with me. It was a pretty emotional time for us as a family, and I was even nervous driving the roads on the way home back to the farm. But if I ask them, they're an expert of their own experience. Full stop.
So good. So good. Love it. It's been a great conversation. Charissa, I'm going to pass over to you to close us out with a karakia. And I want to thank both of you for your efforts, your contribution, and your time. So Grant, thank you so much for joining us on this Balance is Better webinar.
It's been great. Thanks for having me.
And Charissa, thanks to you. I'll pass over to you.
Mahi nui, Dave and Grant. Te tawa mai runga, te tawa mai raro, te tawa mai roto, te tawa mai waho. Kia tau ai te mauri tū, kia tau ai te mauri ora, tūturu whakamawa, kia tina, haumi e, hui e, tai ki e.
Thanks so much, Charissa. We'll see everyone soon.